Okay, so hello. Uh, as you know, my name is Mike, and today we're going to discuss a new service in OpenStack. It's called Glare, and I think we split this session in two parts. First one, I'm going to tell you about the whole conception. So what Glare is again, and present some API. And so first part will be dedicated to almost the spec. The spec is on my screen right now. And the second part, I'm going to present the code. Today we splitted that big patch in 7 small patches. So you are able to review it. And there I'm going to present how Glare is organized. Glare code is organized. So now my screen is shared. And the first part, the main difference between glance and Glare. In Glare, you're able to create your own structure. So you can create your own glances if you want. You can define any structure and create and different multiple blobs and so on. So, and these structures are called artifact types. So artifact types defines the structure, both data and their properties. Unlike glance, in Glare we have few artifact statuses. So the same, we have queued status. It means that artifact is not ready to be used. So it's in production state. It's just a draft of artifact, and it's available only for its owner and for administrator. In this case, Glare doesn't checks any mutability properties, so you can set any properties except system. And this artifact in this state is absolutely modifiable. Then when artifact is ready, it becomes active. Unlike glance, it's a direct request. So for example, in glance v2, if you upload some data, image becomes active just right after upload. In Glare, it's not true, because in Glare we can have several blobs per artifact, and they have to be uploaded separately, of course. So to activate artifact, you have to send a direct request. It's patch request. Then, like in glance, you can deactivate artifact. So it will be visible for users, but no data will be downloadable in that case. Only administrator can download this data. It's like glance. And finally, it's deleted, so no one can use this artifact anymore. And from artifact can be restored from this state. Here you can see status transition. So it's pretty easy. You can queue artifact, then it can become only active or deleted. From active, it can be deactivated and reactivated to active again, and of course, it's deleted. Pretty simple. Much simpler than what we have in glance. Then let's talk about artifact property. As you may know, in glance, image has properties. For example, it's disk format, container format. They are string properties. Also, there are min RAM and min disk. They are integer properties. In Glare, you can define your own properties, and 4 types, simple types, are available. First of all, it is string. Then it is integer, float, and boolean. Also, you are able to use generic types, dictionary and lists. So you can define dictionary of, for example, strings or list of strings. And also you are able to use blob. I will tell you about blob a little bit later. And also you can define dictionary of blobs. Then every property has several additional attributes. Also, I wanted to tell that we use Oslo versioned object framework to define the schema artifact types. So all features from Oslo versioned objects are available in Glare. But also, we define several new features, attributes. It's only Glare related, and it's additional attributes. So first one is required on activate, which means that this value must be set when artifact is activated. Good example from Glance, it is disk format and container format. Without these properties, you're not able to activate image. Then this attribute parameter is called mutable. Mutable means that this property is modifiable, mutable after artifact activation, because by default almost all properties are mutable. You are not able to modify it when artifact is active. But if you want to modify, you can set mutable to true. For example, mutable property is description. You may change it every time you want. Then it's called protected. It means that this value cannot be edited by user. Good example of this properties with this parameter is ID, status. So status cannot be modified by user directly. Then to sort by some value, it's able to define property sortable. If sortable is true, then user can sort by this value. For example, it's you can sort by min RAM or min disk in images. Default value is pretty simple. It's default value. So if this value is not provided initially, then it's set by default. Validators, it's a feature we implemented in Glare. So validators, it's a functions or lambda, and it sets some additional restrictions to this property. So for example, you can limit string of length string length by, for example, 255 characters, or you can limit min RAM by 1000, and so on. In that case, it allows you not to define new artifact types or not property types. In that case, you just can set validator, and Glare will check this for you. I will present a lot of examples how to do it, how to define your own artifact types, I think in the second part. And then filter ops, it sets the basic amount of filters to sort when you want to list artifact. So by default, it's EQ, not EQ, and as far as and in, yeah, and in. Then artifact dependency, it's property type. It's here. So you can define your own properties, and it's a string to some artifact. Currently, Glare doesn't support hard links, hard dependencies. Only soft dependencies are here, but for sure, in future, we will implement hard dependencies as well. There are two formats of dependencies. It is external and internal dependencies. External dependencies starts with HTTPS, and then some net location and pass to artifact. So it's a dependency to some external artifact in external Glare. To set a dependency to some local artifact, you can just define artifacts without any net locations and schemas like HTTP. Then I think let's talk about artifact blob. From user's representation, it's a dictionary. It's just a dictionary that contains several properties. Let me open the schema. Yeah, here it is. So there are just 4 required properties. It is size, it's integer, then it's checksum. External, it's a special flag that defines that this blob was created by setting custom locations. So setting custom location. So it wasn't a direct data upload to Glance. It was just setting location, and in this case, Glare won't delete data if the artifact with this blob is removed. And also it's a status. For blob, we have 3 statuses. First one is saving. It means that artifact blob is uploading right now. It's the same status that we have in Glance for images. So when data is uploading, status is saving. Then, when data is already uploaded, blob status becomes active. It means that it can be downloaded and used. Also, if you set custom location, then blob status becomes active right after that. So there is no saving status. And when artifact is deleted, then all its blobs marked as pending delete, and they will be removed with Scrubber or by Glare itself if delay delete is not activated. Then every artifact has version. Version, it's a string in somewhere format. You can sort, filter by this parameter, and it works. And also, as I mentioned, we have dictionary and lists. It's not a simple property, it's generic types, so you have to define what type it contains, and it's done by defining this attribute element type. So you can define dictionary and set element type as, for example, string, and it will be dictionary of strings. Here we see this transition. I already told about that. Then I'm going to tell you about artifact members. So members are the same as we have in Glance right now. And members are projects in Keystone. If artifact is shared, then user becomes a member of this artifact, but it's only read-only access. And finally, its visibility. It's slightly different from what we have in Glance. First of all, like in Glance, we have three different visibilities. It's private, shared, and public. Private works the same as in Glance, so it means that artifact is available only for its owner and administrator, and it's read-write access. Then, to set different from private visibility, you have to activate artifact. When artifact is in queued state, it means that it's useless. It's not ready to be consumed by any other user. So there is no meaning for share this queued artifact or make it public. And to share artifact or make it public, you have to activate it first. So when artifact is activated, you're able to share this artifact with some other user. API is the same as in Glance. And also you're able to make it public. We created it, we made it by default admin only operation, but anyway, it's a separate request. So to publish artifact, you're able to send another request. And also Glare supports hooks. I will tell you about it later. So you're able to do some actions before activation and publishing of artifact. So it's all concept I wanted to present, and let's go to Glare's API. If we have some time, I will stop and show you some different use cases. We have them a lot here. So let's talk about REST API, Glare v1 API. It was one of the latest decisions. We decided to use microversions. So unlike in Glance, our URLs don't start with v1/v1/artifacts. It's done with microversion guidelines, and our URLs start with just artifacts. That's all. Then all REST API complies with several OpenStack API working group guidelines. First one is filtering, sorting, and pagination. You can read the specification to be more familiar with filtering, sorting in Glare. Then it tags. And finally, it errors. Glare represents errors as JSON, in JSON format. And also we use, to update some artifact properties, we use JSON patch. It's standardized JSON patch, not that one we use in Glance. So it's official library, and it complies with JSON patch standard. So let's talk about API request. To see available versions, you just send request to /versions. I believe two versions will be available. It's 0.1, it's experimental, and v1 here. By default, it will be v1. Then to list of available artifact types schemas, it's just get request to schemas. And when you want to get a schema of some artifact type, you just send request to get schemas artifact type. That's all. I got some messages in BlueJeans. It told me. Yeah. I will describe hooks later in the second part. By the way, on the summit, I showed you these hooks. So it's just a small remark about hooks. We have three possible hooks. First one is hook on blob upload. So you can define some action before blob is uploaded. Then we have hooks for artifact activation, and finally for artifact publishing. Okay, let's back to Glare's API. So to list artifacts of some specific type, you send get request to /artifact type. So for example, if we work with heat templates, it will be get /artifact /heat templates. And you got and also all query parameters are available. You can add sorting, filtering, and everything you want from these guidelines. Everything is available right now. To create artifact of some specific type, you send post request and provide some data. Here, if you can specify some properties that are marked as protected, or in latest code we called it system properties. As I mentioned, these properties, for example, it's ID, it's created at, and so on. You are not able to specify these properties in body of this request, and if you do it, then you got a bad request. So only available properties can be set here. To show artifact, you have to provide /artifacts artifact type and artifact ID, and it returns JSON representation of artifact. If property is not set, then as I mentioned, default value will be presented. By default value is none. So if you haven't set some property, it will be none here. JSON patch is used to update artifact, and currently to add a custom location for a blob. And it's typical JSON patch. So if you want to update or add some property, you send JSON request, and if everything is okay, there returns 200 OK code and representation of modified artifact in its body. To update some specific properties, for example, to activate artifact, you have to send patch request as well. But you have to replace artifact status by active, and it works. To deactivate artifact as well, you just send patch request and replace active status with deactivated, and so on. And finally, to delete artifact, you just have to delete, send delete request to artifact ID. Nothing special here. To upload and download blob, you need to know artifact type schema to define blob name. And as well, you just specify some artifact ID, is blob name, and send put request with content type octet stream. To download artifact, you do the same, but it's just get request and it returns data of required blob. I don't want to stop too much on members, because members, first of all, they are not implemented at this moment, so in the code you are not able to share artifact, but it's our priority. And the second, it works the same as in Glance. So we have absolutely the same request, the same URLs, and it works like in Glance. And finally, we have tags. To be more familiar with tags, you can just read this guideline from API working group. But to add a tag, you send put request to some artifact ID tags and this tag name. So to remove this tag, you send delete request. It's pretty easy. So here, also in the spec, you can find some requests of or some examples of requests in Glare, and you can send this request and play with Glare as well. So I think we can go to questions. If you have some, I'll be happy to answer them. Any questions? Unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Hey, Mike, I think it's just people are trying to grasp things. Before we start taking questions, I just want to make sure somebody's taking notes. I'll take notes if no one is. Is Kairat, are you taking notes on the Etherpad?
Notes.
I mean, like, I do have questions, so I'll start with those, but if people have questions, you might want to take notes. Just want to make sure somebody is actually on that. Okay, so Kairat, how about you take notes on the Etherpad?
No, I didn't take any note. I think the spec is the main note here for the first part of the meeting, because what Mike did is just explain the spec and clarified some moments. Yeah.
No, so I'll have some questions to help people, but I just want to make sure that we document that somewhere. You know, just please take notes on the Etherpad. I'll link to the Etherpad, and at the bottom of the Etherpad, just take notes of what was discussed in the Midcycle.
Okay.
Yeah, so also we can walk through different use cases and just see how Glare works on examples. I'm not sure if it's required. It's better for you to read the spec. It's pretty well documented. It's detailed. And if you have some questions after reading the spec, we can discuss every time, for example, in IRC or by email or in Garrett directly. So what do you think? Should we walk through some use cases?
I think we should, but I think like what the use case, I think it's good to have that we have stated all the use cases, but it probably needs a little bit more info in terms of what the problem statement that we're trying to solve, because there's a bit of overlap in terms of what we're doing. So the fundamental thing is that we want to write Glare, and the hard part is writing it in a way that it will be sort of compatible with Glance in so many ways, right? So we want to understand where we are diverging from the Glance design and what the necessity is. Is it like a strong use case for that we need to diverge from Glance, or if it's if it's some requirement of some specific teams for that, like heat templates might want some specific things that not necessarily work for Glance. So I think we want to consider those carefully.
So
that's
by the way,
something probably to document.
yeah, I just wanted to tell several things about compatibility with Glance. Initially, it was our priority to make our API as much compatible with Glance as possible. But after a lot of discussions with API working group, they told us that it's better to have more clear API, and no one will use Glare as Glance replacement. So, of course, Glare can work with images from Glance in parallel, but API compatibility, 100% compatibility with Glance, it's not required, I think. And that's why we, for example, deprecated actions. So for example, in Glance,
those things we cannot say.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And also we uploaded the code, and there is no image artifact type right now. And moreover, I think it won't work with the existing code because we changed several things there. But our priority at the moment, it's Murano and heat artifact types. We have a lot of requests from these teams, from PTL of Heat and Murano. Heat PTL promised to read the spec next week. The same story for Murano. I hope I got some feedback from Alex and Kirill tomorrow. And also, App Catalog really wants to use Glare at the moment. And it will be our priorities for Newton. So no images right now, and no compatibility with Glance.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? We cannot say right now because for images there is like a lot of discussion going on for having an API that makes sense for large scale and small scale clouds. So with the current design, that artifacts I see for the I don't want to go into sharing. I don't want to go into tags and all those things, dependencies and stuff. So just thinking about create, read, update, and delete, I think we will never be able to go with images, and I think that's fine. Let's separate that because we need to be clear in terms of our images. Images API for OpenStack implementation of API that will work for different types of clouds, and clients will be able to consume that and stuff. So if we cannot provide compatibility, then that's fine, and we say Glare is not for images, and we need to be clear in that communication. And I think we need to do that in Newton because we are going to stabilize this API, right? So
yeah.
Either we say that this API will evolve over time, and that's fine because I see microversions. But that adds a little bit of complexity in terms of upgrades, and it adds complexity for the design decisions that we have taken for dependence and stuff. So from the looks of it, it seems that images is not priority in Glance, and I think having some sort of agreement here that we're not going to target for images for at least next 3 or 5 years, that sounds fine. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, but also I think I have one comment here. It's a request from Murano team, and as far as you know, in Glare we have dependencies, and Murano requires dependencies on images. So I think can we organize image artifact type but make it read-only? So Glare only will available to see images, list them but not modify. It's good for Murano because they will be able to set links to image artifacts, but anyway, Glare won't be able to create or update or delete any image artifact. What do you think? Can we organize this in Newton or in Okata?
Yeah, I think what we can do is a registry-like approach where Glare would be an internal API for images, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just a different not representation, implementation, yeah, of DB API. It's not a priority feature for Murano at this moment because they can also use direct dependencies on Glance. But it will be much better if these dependencies are managed by Glare itself. Yeah, it's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not a priority, let's wait on it because there is a lot of dust that needs to be settled in the community about Glance API. So once that settles, we will know exactly what our concepts look like at the end of it.
Yeah. But as I mentioned, it's not a priority feature, and if it postpone it to, for example, Okata, when API is stable, it's absolutely okay. So it's not required at this moment. So, are there any questions more about the API?
So I was looking at the members thing, and you mentioned that it's not implemented.
Yeah.
So I think the API looks like fine. I mean, it's pretty straightforward and it's easy to consume. So it's really good from that perspective. I don't see like any major blockers for that API. But I'm just a little bit worried about image sharing because we did talk about a bunch of things rather recently, and I just don't want to see a set direction on artifact sharing as well, unless we are okay to not have that sort of sharing. So if we do that, if we don't go the way Glance sharing is going, then we're going to have less adoption in terms of sharing, and it's going to be pretty painful in the long run. But if sharing can be avoided for the cycle, then I think that's probably the best thing to do. And then let's pick up on the use our micro versions to do the magic for any API changes, and then let's pick up on the sharing aspects for Okata in a way that's going to be helpful in the long run.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay. By the way, Also, I wanted to tell you about several additional features. I mentioned about them when I described the spec, but the first thing is how to create dictionary of blobs.
Mike, I think Nikhil said something about sharing. He's concerned about current.
Unfortunately, my computer was dead this moment, I think, and I was turned off, and I couldn't hear it. Yeah, about sharing, I wanted to implement sharing like it's done in Glance. Yeah, I missed. And it will be our, I think, the highest priority, because several, for example, Murano requires sharing of artifacts, as far as I understand them. Also, sharing is good for app catalog to create non-public, so private artifacts.
Yeah, I talked
about
to the app catalog folks, and
yeah, so I'm going to open.
someone else was talking.
Just wait a second. Where is it? This other pod. And okay. Yeah. So I think you added some questions here. Clarify. There is some complication current Glance architecture about image sharing. Glare is going to use Glance way or sharing, then will be blocked in the evolution of the sharing concept. Best approach is to depend on the community image sharing and follow up bookmarking. Yeah. I think we need to discuss artifact sharing more, because I think there may be some problems when we will start implementing sharing in Glare. And as far as I know, Timothy Simanchuk is working on community sharing in Glance, and frankly speaking, I think it will be good if we will discuss this sharing with him more, because he knows about sharing much more than we do.
Yeah, so Mike, I think like we are stuck on the community image sharing stuff at this point. I think we're taking an incremental approach. It's an enhancement in the first step, and then we're gonna do some cleanup on the image sharing. And I think it would be best if Glare can also, use that enhancements in the
By default,
first level design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit of complication. So if you see the discussion on the spec and there are some ether packs, I think Timothy may be able to link you those ether packs if needed. So you can figure out all the different issues that were raised by Brian and Erno and a few other folks, Ian as well. So let's hold off on sharing a little bit is what I think. If there's a way we can talk to the Murano folks and get them to wait on us, then that would be the best option, I think.
Yeah. Also, because currently V1 has experimental status, we will be able to update any requests later. Kairat, what do you think?
Can we cover some simple use cases for image sharing? I think what's the problem with current approach in Glance? Because it's not clear for me. As I heard for community images, the main problem is because we have some Nova instances that depends on glance images, and when glance images has been deleted, then we can not do any snapshots or something else. Do I understand correctly the root cause of the community images issues?
Mm.
I mean,
They're not one. They're not one, but like there are many issues. And I think we have, after a lot of discussion, we have come to some understanding in terms of what we want to do in Glance. So Glance image sharing is mature and it's used in some clouds. So we know what the issues on the field look like, and then we're gonna use all of that feedback into evolving the architecture a little bit more. So on a fundamental level, we have sharing that is coupled with bookmarking, and we're trying to come up with a more conceptually, sort of better baked design for how consumers are gonna be able to record or bookmark and list their images which are shared in a specific way. So that's quite a bit of discussion in the future, I think. So
so it's not
really
about community. If I understand correctly, it's not about community images, but rather about bookmarking for images and artifacts.
Yes, I would call it like a general sharing design.
Okay. So, Mike, I think we need to talk with our folks to discuss if we're okay with that. For me personally, that's okay. I think we can. First steps, admins can use Vagrants to manage images, maybe clone them or something else. If we implement clone in future.
Yeah, for sure we will implement clone in future because it's very useful. But it's there are future steps, and frankly speaking, I don't want to discuss it here because they're not so detailed at this moment. How to implement clone, how to organize these counters of blobs, and so on. Also, by the way, we can discuss locks in Glare.
I think we need to decide, should we stay with current image sharing in spec, artifact sharing in spec or not? Should we remove them for now and
Just
propose a separate spec later when we have some more mature understanding of bookmarking design, of image sharing design, and so on? What do you think?
Yes. By the way, we can. So initially we have just Glare without sharing at all. So it's just private and public artifacts. I think it's okay. So we can remove all these stubs from the code because they are not implemented yet, and remove it from the spec as well.
Okay.
And merge it as is. Why not? Yeah. And then we will propose a new spec with bookmarking and different end sharings and implement it in Glare. That's great, I think. Yeah. Nikhil, do you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, so I think like what we could do is like break down each of these individual use cases like cloning, sharing, and all those things that you're talking about and discuss them separately. Because what happens is if you bring up cloning, it has a specific use case and it has certain assumptions of type of cloning that you're doing. For example, for a private cloud, the cloning is simply within a single data center or maybe even two separate endpoints, whatever, but not necessarily in a sense of data going over the public internet, or things set up in a federated environment, or in case of public clouds where the catalog could have multiple endpoints, multiple region endpoints, depending on the user count. So I think there are plenty of assumptions for each of these individual cases, and having all the stakeholders in the same place and discussing them, in a collaborative manner so that we can say, oh, this was, for example, if we discuss this during the next Midcycle, I'm taking the case of cloning, right? So if cloning is the next priority, if we discuss this during the next Midcycle, we can say X number of stakeholders were interested and the use case looked like so and so. And that's what really would help us define the direction of the project. Because if we go and implement something based on one or two stakeholders and then more stakeholders get involved who have majority differing opinion, then we will have to think about re-architecting the whole thing. And that's like probably, the worst scenario. So the best approach for us is provide like a CRUD API that I think like you have done a great job of documenting, right? Different type of use cases of how a user might want to create, activate, and upload artifact and data blobs and dependencies and etc. And I think that itself is a lot of information for us to basically internalize and sort of provide feedback on. And that's why I'm just like trying to isolate these scenarios so that people can think of things in a more focused manner and be able to provide more prompt reviews. Versus if you start thinking of sharing and if you start thinking of cloning, I think it's just going to distract people, and then we may not have a feedback process at all. So it's a little bit related to what we are doing in Glance as well. It's a little bit related to what we're doing in Newton in terms of development and the roadmap and stuff. And it's also like a feedback for you guys to get more reviews on specific certain items that are probably a critical priority versus high or medium priority, right? So we're going to focus on the critical things and get those done. So I think we will really, really know how artifacts really behave once we have a great understanding of what the workflow looks like, right? So how do I create an artifact, and how do I what are the different use cases for status transitions, and what happens when the data blob interactions happen, and then you set those as properties and delete those as properties, and what is really the use case behind having an external and internal dependency. That itself is a big question for me, actually. How do we handle that in a sane manner, right? For example, if an external dependency exists, how do you ensure that the artifact is the dependency in the artifact is correct, and then once you have activated state in the artifact, a public-facing artifact is not going to be disruptive for the end user, because that would be the worst scenario. So, just thinking of these use cases itself is like a big battle in my head, if you may. I mean, does that give you a good indication of what hopefully other people are thinking as well? I won't necessarily represent everyone, but I think some general thought process might be similar here.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions right now, but I think we should do it step by step. So currently we have this simple and small working prototype. It's not just a prototype; it's really working thing. And then we will be able to start implementing new features and answer questions and everything and so on.
Yeah, I think we will get some feedback after initial CRUD implementation, because we will be involving in integration between HIT and Murana, and so we can discuss the API with changes with them also. how do I need sharing, how we're going, if do I need cloning or something else. It will be good feedback, and I think we can use usual approach, specs, and discuss this with our folks in community. Is it needed or not? What is the current use case, and so on and so on. Yeah. So let's concentrate on core component, core functionality, and the extended with spec. What do you think, Nikhil? Is it okay?
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. I think we probably need to focus very hard on the create and update aspects, because those are the, we have a lot of concerns for public facing APIs, and there are a lot of suggestions and opinions in the community of how data streaming should take place. So let's focus on this CRUD of artifacts and then CRUD of blobs, and see how the metadata is going to behave with that. So once we have that core thing, I think it'll set a good direction for us.
Yeah. By the way, I talked with Hit PTL. His name is Thomas Herf, I think, and he said that it's better to have something already implemented, and after that, Hit is ready to start consuming it. So implement some POC to work with Glare as a backend for Hit templates. And they need only one feature from Glare, special feature. It's dictionary of blobs. So they want to create several blobs per one property, and that's all. And yeah, we already have it. And I agree with Kairat. I think it's better to have something and then evolve it to implement features, answer questions, and so on.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you think? We can do 5-minute break, or we can go to the code of Glare? What do you prefer?
Let's see what other things is. Does anybody have preference?
If everyone is okay, I think I can present the code and present you the examples of artifact types, how to define your own artifact type, and how Glare architecture looks like. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
I think you already know. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again and present you my PyCharm with Glare code. So I think now you see my PyCharm here. So we don't have too much code in Glare, and this code is pretty simple and really easy to understand. In short, we have three basic layers. First layer is called API, and API it's just a proxy. So we have just two files here. It's router. Router is absolutely the same as in Glance, not just the same, but its structure is almost the same. And it describes all methods that I talked about in previous presentation. So it's all we have in router. Then it's a resource.
Hey, Mike, sorry to disrupt. Just have a suggestion. I think what might help is if you have something like a working code on your machine where you can create a artifact and update an artifact. Then if you can walk us through that and then take us to the code where it's actually doing that, like the workflow of the code. So I think what it might do is it'll give people a hint of how to test it and review your code. So that will be more useful versus going over the lines of code, which might be a little bit confusing for a long meeting.
So you want me to show some demo of Glare?
Not necessarily demo. So, I mean, I think we have just about half an hour or so, right? So let's focus on like 4 or 5 things. Let's see if we can see how an artifact is getting created. Let's see, corner cases like if it's an invalid artifact or invalid JSON or something like that, and any other exceptions or something like that. So what that will help is, since it's not the straightforward glance way of implementation, right? It's not a domain layer. It's a different architecture itself. So we would like to know what the workflow is. So when I do a create of an artifact using the REST API, if you can walk us through the method chain that is used during the create process, that will help us understand how to deal with that piece of code.
By the way, so again, do you see my PyCharm or not
I can see it
right now? PyCharm screen right now. Great. So, and also, I told that code is on review right now. There are several issues there. I split it a little bit incorrect, but I'll fix it today. So if you want to review the code, please do. And yeah. So about if you see my PyCharm right now, you see that API controller, it's just a proxy. So sorry. Parad, do you see my PyCharm here?
Yep, I can see it. It seems the transmitter had some troubles with connection. He's going to rejoin us. Yep.
Okay, so I think what we should say about our API. API is just a proxy to next layer. So no special things are done here. And just everywhere it's a proxy to the second layer that is called engine. Engine is located in Glare engine, and engine is responsible for several things. First one, it's entity policy enforcing. So here in engine, all policies are enforced. Then it's access control. So here engine checks that user has an access to an artifact, to required artifact. And finally, it's notifications. So engine combines all things from Glance domain model, like policy enforcement, notifications, and authentication and access controlling. And then it works the same. It's just a proxy to next layer. So here, for example, let's see create method. Here initially we have policy enforcement. Then here we check the artifact type. Quota is not checked yet, but it will when we define how it should be done. Then we call method from next layer, and finally we send notification. In update, we have to separate several different use cases. By default, it's just update of properties. But also, if you send change in status, for example, from queued to active, different method, private method is called. It's called activate. If you want to change status from deactivated to active, reactivate will be called. And finally, if you want to change visibility to public, publish will be called here as well. And as usual, engine is just a proxy to next layer. Next layer is called base artifact type. So it's an ancestor of all custom artifact types, and it defines all basic logic for all artifact. It's located in objects, and base. You can see some description here, and it contains several attributes that will be presented in all custom artifact types. First of all, of course, its ID, then its name, owner, status, and so on. Finally, we will see version, and then all methods are described here. For example, create. And update and so on. There is a lot of logic here. The most part of Glare code, of Glare logic, is located in this file. It's called glance objects base.py. And it encapsulates the most all logic from Glare. Now let's see how to create your own artifact type. Here we call it sample artifact type, and it must be inherited from base artifact type, class. It adds some new properties. First of all, it's blob, then its dependency, and there are a lot of different properties. Also, you have to set type name and specify DB API. Currently, only simple API is available, but also it will be just default SQL-based API in near future. So let's talk about different properties of attribute. As I mentioned, for example, blob. Required on activate means that this blob may be not set when artifact is activated, so it's none. Then mutable, if mutable is true, then it means you can upload it after activation. No problems here. Of course, you can sort by this value, by blob. It's not implemented, moreover, and of course you can filter. But let's see, for example, another string1 attribute in this custom type. It has some filters. Filters are described in glance objects fields.py, just near base artifact type. They have two different preset number of filters.
Like you just went quiet. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Wow, I can see my screen. I was disconnected again. Sorry for that.
Okay, I dropped your previous session, so you should be able to share again now.
Thanks. Continue sharing. Great. So we have two basic set of filters. It's filters, just filters, all filters, and it's EQ, not EQ, in, greater, greater and equal, less, less and equal, and also base filters. It's only EQ, not EQ, and filter in that implements OR logic in filters. So you can set several values, and if any value of this set is correct, this artifact will be presented in the output of list. So attribute, it's a function that adds some new properties to attribute from Oslo versioned object. As I mentioned, we use Oslo versioned object to define our artifact type, but it doesn't have several features we need, and it shouldn't have it because it's just glare related. And all these glare related flags and properties are set here in this method. It wraps chars function, and it adds new properties to field, like mutable, system, and so on. To see how validators works, let's see base artifact type again, its structure. So for example, let's see description. Description, it's a basic attribute for that all artifacts or all artifact types has. It's mutable, so you can change the description after artifact modification or activation. But also it has validators. Validators, as I mentioned, it's just a function that contains gets some parameters, and here it's we limit the maximum size of description as 4096 characters. Several validators are already implemented, and they are located near all these files, near base artifact type, near fields, and it's called validators.py. Currently, we have just four of them. First one, it's validator that every key in metadata is its length lower than 255 characters. Then max dictionary size, because in Python, for example, dictionaries are unlimited. But if you want to set some restriction to dictionary size, you can use this validator. Then it's a validator that a given string is UUID. Then tag validator tags in Glare can't contain commas and slashes, and if we want to set this tag that contains these symbols, then there will be a value error. And as we see before, it's max string length that set restriction to a string and limits it max length. What else we have? I think it's all features at this moment, but it's enough to define very cool and very powerful artifact schemas. Yeah, by the way, also there is init function. Init functions allows you to set some dynamic values. For example, created default can contain only static values. But here, if you set init function, then default is ignored, and this function is called every time when you want to set some value to this property. It's good, for example, for created at. So you shouldn't worry. It will be set automatically when when this object is created in Glare. This value will be set to current time. The same story for update. When you update your artifact, set to a new value, then updated data will be modified as well every time. So it's all Glare code that you should be aware about. API is just a proxy, no logic there. Engine encapsulates only some system-related operations like policy enforcement, notifications, and access control, and then it passes the request to base artifact type. And the most all logic in Glare are located here. So if you want to review the code, please start with basic base artifact type. This file is pretty big. There are more than 700 lines of code. There will be more when we delete all member stuff from here. But anyway, it's pretty big. So I think I'm done here. If you have questions, yeah, as well, I will be happy to answer. Of course, I forgot about hooks. So for example, as I mentioned, we have some hooks for activation. They are located here. So you can define some logic before artifact is activated. By default, it's empty method here. But if you want to add some additional checks, validations, or something, you can define this function in your custom artifact type, and it will be executed before updating the artifact. The same story we have when we want to upload blob. It's here. So it's just validate uploading. Where it may be useful. It may be useful if we want to validate some data before pushing it in storage. Here we can define a logic that stores all data in some temporary folder on your controller, validates it, and if it's okay, it passes next to uploading. So upload will begin only if this validation is okay. Also, it was discussed on the summit. This hook, validate upload, can return some data. So it can be set as here. When it's good? It's good if we want to convert some data. So we store some data in temporary folder, validate it, convert it, and then we return this data to the base artifact again. And if you want, and it's pretty easy to implement, not so much things required here. We just need to specify some temporary folder, upload it there with, I think, file storage from Glanstore. Then validate, convert, and return file descriptor back to Glare again. Yeah, I think now that's all I wanted to present you here. So yeah, please, I think you can answer your questions if you have. Are there any questions?
Mike, I missed quite a bit of the start because I have the overlapping meeting myself. Quick question about the. I've noticed that you use the start entry point for the API as a proxy. Is there a specific reason why you wanted to do that, or was it just like the when we looked at Glance API Glare v1 side? So what's the ideology behind that? If you could recap.
Several reasons for that. First of all, we don't want to encapsulate some logic like policy enforcement in API. I think it's not correct. So in API, we have only API. It's just basic checks of JSON, some checking of content type, and that's all. And then it just provides to engine request. Then it's useful if we want to implement some different API. It was designed when we looked at some systems like Artifactory or Nexus, and they implement a lot of different APIs for their system. And for example, we had some request from our infrastructure team in Mirantis, and they wanted to use Glare as a backend for Jenkins. So Jenkins will store all its artifact to Glare. And that's why we can use, for example, Jenkins API to in opposite with just Glare API. It's the second reason. And the third one, I think it's good because we can use Glare as a standalone library, not as a service. Where it can be useful, for example, to store some logs somewhere. But yeah, so there are three reasons, but I think the first one and the more priority one is that we don't want to put a lot of logic in API.
I guess versioning is the one more important point to behave API as a proxy. So the initial intention was just make API controller work with simple data primitives, with only primitives, and all complex business logic should be shifted to engine or base artifacts and so on and so on. That was the initial intention as far as I remember. Yep. And when we started to just investigating how it will be work with how will it work with microversioning, it turns out that it is very useful to have API to just prepare data to proper format and pass it forward to engine, and to shift all business logic to engine, to base artifact, to our objects. That's one more point from my side.
Yeah.
I think for me the biggest thing what kind of drew my attention into it was the lack of the policy enforcement on the API level, and that's why I wanted to check what was the kind of biggest intention behind that. The second question what I had in my mind is, we have had lots and lots of discussion and issues about the fact that Glance does not have a admin API. Have you been thinking about that, to not expose the clearly admin-only stuff through the like public-facing API and actually implementing a proper admin API for Glare?
All API is regulated by policies, so if you want to forbid regular users to do some actions, you can just set policy. So, for example, I want to prevent users from setting custom locations, and we can just set role admin there. The same story for publishing. So I think it's not a good idea to allow users to publish artifacts. So I think every action in Glare has its policy, and operator can regulate what policies, what actions users can do. Other admin API, I don't think where it may be useful. I think, we have several requests.
Sorry, yeah. So just to clarify the question, are you talking about separate endpoints for admins? Or no?
Yeah, exactly. So for example, I think relying those things that we know from the beginning that will be purely admin only stuff. I think looking the current DevCore situation, it's quite dangerous decision to go and rely those on the policies only, because if something what is intended to be admin only starts to going wild where deployers allow those things to be operated by normal users, at some point DevCore might just go and start mandating like that everyone is using that, publishing that, because majority of the clouds where they hit in happens to have it enabled. So that's why, like, in my point of view, it would be just really good action to think to clarify that if there is something what we think that is admin only task, that we have it behind separate endpoint and just separate those two discussions altogether, and not provide admin task on the public API at all, even they are poorly policy controlled.
I think so currently admin API is not implemented, and yeah, only policies. It can be controlled only by policies, but if it's required, we really can implement it in future. So it's not a big problem here.
Just reminder that if we release that API, we need to stick with it. So we can't just go and move those bits and blobs to the admin API. That's one thing why I'm putting this out now, is that because you have the proxy controlling the API, that change would be actually really easy to do now, and make sure that we have those two things separate if rest of the community agrees.
So we need to think what is pure admin actions for now, because I think that we don't have best actions right now. Maybe publishing.
But publishing, I think some operators may allow it to some users to publish artifacts.
Yeah. So it seems that
we don't have purely admin actions at this moment.
Yeah. But of course, we can implement and separate admin API without big troubles, because the API is just proxy to engine who provides all business logic to users.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Like it kind of would make sense that if some deployer definitely wants to, because everything is policy controlled on top of that. So if some deployer really wants that every single user of their cloud can publish their images, they basically can expose that admin API and set the policy for it correctly. But that doesn't mean that every single cloud would suddenly be demanded to publishing that admin API. It just looking the situation where we landed with Glance and how much we have fighting specifically with the V1 API around tasks, what is done there and what shouldn't be public facing at all. I think it just would make sense to separate those two things to different endpoints from the very beginning now, when looking how you did that.
So guys, here's a food for thought. So how many APIs do you actually have as an admin? If it's not like a big number, if it's less than 5, I think it would make sense to add the authorization to use context admin versus policy admin. And if you use context admin, then there is no way to regulate that API to be public facing or not public facing. And that way, even for a small number of API calls, you wouldn't necessarily have to implement a separate facing endpoint. So that will solve both the problems.
Yeah, it's one possible alternative. I think we implemented it right now. We can make publish for artifacts as admin only without any policy, and after that to decide if we need how we are going to proceed.
Yeah. So
it's just even the API looks simple and nice at the moment, and it looks like there is not that many of those things. But I just wanted to point it out that the reminder, at the point when that code is published and the API is released, there is no way we can pull the stuff we suddenly want to have as a admin API out of there. Other way we can go. So if we decide that, hey, this functionality is actually something that shouldn't be just part of the admin API, it's easy to add that functionality to the public API, but there is no way we can pull it out from there once it has been released. And that's my biggest concern at the moment.
But right now it will be V1 will be experimental for several months, and we can change it at any moment. So
or at least we can use micro versions as an option for this to raise the version and maybe some new
but
version
we still
will
can't remove stuff with micro versions.
Yeah,
I think we can. So Nova does that. Nova does that, and I think they have like pretty good success there, so it should be fine.
Yes, but they have to also support all the previous versions. So only thing what you need to do to actually access that remove functionality is to define on your client that you want to use previous version of the API.
Yeah, that is true. There's definitely overhead. So I think like since this is a developer problem, I think what we should do is determine what is our best route forward in terms of maintainability of the code, right? Is the admin API is the best route, or do we have small set of calls where context admin is the best route, or we have to think about cases where you might want to expose this some functionality without service tokens to some services, and then that would require you to have policies versus admin tokens. So if you guys can like think about a good set of use cases where we need to narrow down the access, then that will help us take a better decision.
Yep. So yeah, I agree that I think we need to consider use cases. Is where is a lot of for me publishing with context as admin is okay right now, and if we will not introduce any policy for that, that's also okay. And if we introduce some admin API at one point, it is not conflicting to have admin API and publishing for admins only in public API for me. But if we will, if in the future we have a lot of admin-only actions, of course we need to implement this as a separate admin API. Yeah, I agree with that, and we can prepare a separate spec for that and go to this direction. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. So I don't see just pure admin actions at this moment. So all actions we have in Glare can be done with by regular users. So if there are some admin actions, we will implement this admin API pretty easily. I think Keystone has this admin API, so we can look how they do it and do the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we need to review Keystone user experience with admin API and so on.
Just for the reference, in the past, whenever I think Brian and I had a few chats with Mark about some specific operations to be part of plans to be part of admin API as a separate endpoint, and Mark Washington seemed to be always against it, and I think that was with good reason. Just that I don't remember that. So I think we should have a chat with. Let's say maybe bring this up in a TC meeting or a cross project meeting and see what people think is the best route. right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a spec for standardizing the service catalog, and if you can get feedback from those folks specifically, I think that would be pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, currently I think we're out of time, and API working group meeting will be in 20 minutes, and I believe I want to go there and present Nuclear API spec.